People always say being sent away is about space. They never talk about what it really means to be removed quietly, like a problem no one wants to solve. I didn't understand it then, but the day they called me difficult, something in my family had already broken. I just didn't know yet that I was the only one who noticed. Before I go on, if stories about hidden truths, family silence, and quiet strength resonate with you, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon so you don't miss what comes next. Some stories don't end when you think they do. They said it casually at first, like it was a harmless observation, that I asked too many questions, that I didn't let things go, that I had a habit of noticing details other people preferred to ignore. Whenever something felt unfair, I spoke up. Whenever a story didn't make sense, I asked why. And slowly, that became my label: difficult. It wasn't shouted, it was whispered behind closed doors, exchanged in looks, confirmed in quiet conversations I wasn't meant to hear. By the time it reached me, the decision had already been made. I remember the day clearly, not because it was dramatic, but because it was calm in a way that felt wrong. My parents sat across from me, hands folded, voices controlled. They explained that it would be better for everyone if I stayed somewhere else for a while. A relative, a change of environment, a chance to cool off. They said it was temporary. They said it was for my own good. They said I would understand one day. I wanted to ask what I had actually done wrong, but something stopped me. Not fear, instinct. The kind that tells you a question won't be answered honestly no matter how gently you ask it. So I nodded. I packed, I left. The place they sent me to wasn't unkind, just distant. Polite smiles, careful conversations. I was treated like a guest who had overstayed before even arriving. No one asked me why I was there, and I didn't volunteer an explanation because I didn't have one that made sense. At first, I thought maybe I was the problem. Maybe I really had been too much, too observant, too vocal, too unwilling to accept things at face value. I replayed memories in my head, searching for moments where I could have chosen silence instead of honesty. But the more time passed, the clearer something became. Nothing felt resolved. Phone calls from home were short and vague. Updates were selective. Important details were skipped. Whenever I asked about decisions being made without me, the answer was always the same: "We'll talk about it when you're back." That phrase became familiar, comfortable, dangerous. I started paying attention to patterns instead of words. Who called and who didn't, what topics were avoided, how quickly conversations ended when I asked follow-up questions. It was subtle but consistent. I wasn't being given space to reflect. I was being removed from the conversation entirely. And then there were the stories. Stories about me, I later realized, shared casually with extended family, framed carefully. I was going through a phase. I was sensitive. I was struggling. None of it was untrue on the surface, but none of it explained why I had been sent away without being consulted. The more I listened, the more I understood that my absence made things easier for them. Without me there, no one questioned timelines, no one challenged assumptions, no one noticed contradictions. Family discussions flowed smoothly, uninterrupted by uncomfortable questions. I wasn't missed for who I was missed for the silence I provided. That realization didn't make me angry right away. It made me patient. I stopped trying to prove anything. I stopped correcting people. I let them believe the version of me that was easiest to manage. In that quiet, something unexpected happened. I learned how people behave when they think they're no longer being observed. I learned which relatives repeated the same explanations without variation, and which ones avoided certain topics altogether. I learned who benefited most from my absence. And most importantly, I learned that the truth rarely needs force. It needs timing. The call that told me I was coming back came months later, just as calmly as the one that sent me away. No apology, no explanation, just a statement that it was time. I didn't argue. When I packed this time, it felt different. I wasn't returning as the same person who had left. Distance had done what confrontation never could. It had given me clarity. As the car pulled into the familiar street, I noticed something immediately. The house looked the same, but the atmosphere didn't. There was tension in the air, like something unfinished had been waiting. Inside, everyone greeted me warmly, too warmly. Compliments, smiles, reassurances that everything was better now. No one mentioned why I had left. No one asked how it felt to come back. That silence told me more than any confession ever could. And as I sat there listening to familiar voices repeat familiar phrases, I realized something important. They thought I had been sent away to change. They didn't realize I had been sent away to understand. And the truth they were trying so hard to protect, it hadn't disappeared while I was gone. It had been waiting for me to return. And the moment I stepped back into that house, I could feel it pressing against the walls. At first, I played the role they expected. I smiled when spoken to. I answered questions politely. I didn't challenge anyone. That alone seemed to relax them. They mistook my calm for acceptance, my silence for agreement. I watched how quickly they slipped back into old habits once they thought the danger had passed. Conversations happened around me, not with me. Decisions were referenced casually, as if I had always been included. Whenever I asked for clarification, the answers were vague but confident, the kind of confidence that comes from repeating a story often enough to believe it. What fascinated me was how coordinated it all felt. My parents never contradicted each other. My aunt finished my mother's sentences. My uncle redirected conversations when they drifted too close to specifics. Even extended family seemed to know which topics were safe and which were not. It wasn't accidental, it was practiced. And yet cracks began to appear almost immediately. A small comment here didn't align with something I'd heard before. A timeline shifted slightly depending on who was speaking. Responsibilities that had once been clearly assigned were suddenly described as shared. Each inconsistency was minor on its own, but together they formed a pattern. I didn't confront it. I remembered what distance taught me. Truth doesn't need to be chased. It reveals itself when people grow careless. They assumed I had been humbled by my time away, that being labeled difficult had finally taught me my place. They didn't see the difference between obedience and observation. I started listening more closely than ever. At dinner, I let stories unfold without interruption. When someone exaggerated, I nodded. When details were skipped, I stayed quiet. The longer I stayed silent, the more comfortable they became. And comfort breeds honesty. Unintentional honesty, but honesty nonetheless. I noticed how often my absence was framed as necessary, not unfortunate, necessary, as if sending me away had been a solution to a problem they didn't want to name. The word peace came up a lot. So did stability. They spoke about harmony like something fragile, easily disrupted by questions. That told me everything. One afternoon, while helping in the kitchen, I overheard my mother and aunt speaking in low voices. They didn't notice me at first. My name came up, followed by a pause that lasted just a little too long. "She seems different," my aunt said. My mother agreed, not with relief, but with uncertainty. That was when I understood something important. They hadn't sent me away because I was difficult. They had sent me away because I was inconvenient. I represented uncertainty in a family that valued control. I asked questions they couldn't answer without admitting things they weren't ready to face. Removing me had bought them time, but time doesn't erase truth. It just delays the moment it has to be addressed. That moment arrived sooner than they expected. It happened during a routine meeting at school. My parents were there, a counselor, a teacher who had known me before I was sent away. The discussion was supposed to be about my future plans, courses, opportunities, responsibilities. Halfway through, the counselor asked a simple question. When was the decision made? Everyone paused. The question wasn't directed at me, but I felt it land. My parents exchanged a glance. My father answered quickly, confidently. He gave a date, a neat answer. The teacher frowned slightly. She mentioned a conversation she remembered, one that didn't match the timeline my father had just given. No accusation, just confusion. That's when I spoke. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't challenge anyone directly. I simply asked another question, softly, the way curiosity sounds when it isn't defensive. Silence. Not the comfortable kind, the kind that forces people to become aware of themselves. They tried to recover. Explanations overlapped. Words like miscommunication and misunderstanding filled the room, but the damage was already done. For the first time, the story wasn't controlled. After the meeting, my parents were quiet, not angry, careful. At home that evening, my father finally asked me why I had said that. I told him the truth, that I wasn't trying to cause trouble, that I just wanted clarity, that being sent away without explanation had taught me how much information could be withheld without technically lying. He didn't respond right away. That silence was different from the others. It wasn't strategic, it was reflective. Over the next few days, more questions surfaced, from teachers, from relatives who had started noticing inconsistencies, from people who realized they'd been giving partial explanations and never thought to ask for the rest. The family narrative began to wobble. Not collapse, not yet, but wobble. And as it did, something shifted in how they looked at me, not as a problem anymore, but as a variable they hadn't accounted for. I wasn't aggressive, I wasn't confrontational, I wasn't trying to expose anything. I was just present. And presence, I learned, is powerful when people have built their comfort on your absence. By the time they realized that sending me away hadn't solved anything, it was already too late to undo what had started, because the truth wasn't waiting to be revealed dramatically, it was unfolding slowly, and they were running out of places to hide it. The house began to feel smaller, not physically smaller, but emotionally compressed, like too many truths were trying to exist in a space designed for comfort and denial. Every room carried tension now. Even silence sounded different. It was no longer protective, it was exposed. They became more careful with me after that. Not kinder, careful. Words were chosen slowly. Decisions were postponed instead of announced. I noticed how often my parents checked each other's reactions before answering even simple questions. The coordination that once felt seamless now looked fragile, like a performance running out of rehearsal. I stayed calm. That was the part they didn't understand. They expected anger. They expected tears. They expected some kind of emotional reaction they could respond to, manage, or dismiss. But calm gave them nothing to push against. Instead, I watched. I watched my uncle grow uneasy whenever I entered a room. He used to dominate conversations, guiding them with humor and confidence. Now his jokes felt shorter, his laughter forced. He avoided topics that required memory or detail. When others asked questions, he redirected quickly, as if afraid of where curiosity might lead. My aunt tried a different approach. She became warm, almost overly so. Compliments, praise, subtle reminders of how much the family loved me. It felt like an attempt to soften something she knew was becoming sharp. But kindness, when used to distract instead of connect, has a hollow sound. The most telling change was in my parents. They had always spoken with authority, especially when explaining why things were done a certain way. Now that authority wavered. They framed decisions as suggestions. They asked instead of told. They sought agreement where they expected obedience. Not because they had suddenly changed their values, but because the old structure no longer held. One evening, my mother asked if we could talk, just the two of us. We sat at the kitchen table long after dinner had ended. No distractions, no raised voices, just an uncomfortable honesty that neither of us could escape anymore. She admitted, slowly, that sending me away hadn't been about my behavior alone. It had been about control, about keeping peace by avoiding conflict, about choosing what felt easier instead of what was fair. She said they were afraid of how much I noticed. That sentence stayed with me. Afraid of how much I noticed. Not afraid of wrongdoing, afraid of being seen clearly. She explained how family decisions had been made for years without real discussion, roles assigned early, expectations set quietly. Questioning those roles felt like disruption, and I disrupted them simply by asking why. Sending me away had seemed like a temporary fix, a way to restore balance, a way to protect the family from uncomfortable conversations. I listened without interrupting. She waited for a reaction, for forgiveness, for reassurance. I didn't give it. Not because I was cruel, but because I was honest. I told her that what hurt wasn't being sent away. It was being excluded from the truth. It was being treated like a problem instead of a person capable of understanding complexity. I told her that silence isn't peace when it's forced. It's just quiet resentment waiting for air. She cried then. Not loudly, quietly. The kind of crying that comes when someone realizes their intentions don't excuse their choices. After that conversation, things changed more quickly. Not magically, not perfectly, but the pretending stopped. My parents began correcting others when they oversimplified my absence. They stopped using the word difficult. My aunt stopped speaking for me. My uncle spoke less in general. People outside the immediate family noticed too. Teachers, counselors, relatives who had once accepted the family explanation without question now saw the full picture emerging, not through exposure, but through consistency. I never changed my story. That mattered. When people asked, I explained calmly. When they expressed surprise, I didn't dramatize it. I didn't need to. The contrast between what they had been told and what they were now hearing did the work for me. The revenge, if it could be called that, wasn't loud. It was inevitability. Because once people see that a narrative has been managed, they start asking who benefited from that management. And when they do, silence becomes suspicious. One afternoon, I overheard my uncle arguing with my father, not shouting, frustrated, defensive. He said things were getting out of hand, that people were misinterpreting, that they should have handled it differently. That was the first time I heard regret, not for what they did, but for how it ended. The realization hit me then. This wasn't about punishment. It was about consequence, not imposed by me, but created by their own choices. They had built a system that relied on my absence, and when I returned, the system couldn't sustain itself. By the time they tried to reassert control, it was already gone. Authority that relies on silence collapses the moment silence breaks. I didn't take anything from them. They lost it themselves. And as the truth continued to surface piece by piece, I understood something that made everything else feel lighter. I hadn't been sent away because I was difficult. I had been sent away because I was honest in a place that preferred comfort. And now that honesty was home again, whether they were ready for it or not. Honesty had already taken its place at the center of everything. After that realization, I stopped waiting for permission to exist fully in my own life. I didn't announce anything. I didn't demand apologies or explanations. I simply lived as someone who no longer accepted half-truths as answers. That shift alone changed how people interacted with me. They tested it at first. Small things, casual assumptions, old habits resurfacing in conversations. Someone would speak over me and then stop mid-sentence when I didn't retreat. Someone would decide something for my benefit, then hesitate when I asked how they reached that conclusion. The hesitation was new. It was uncomfortable for them, but strangely calming for me. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to decisions after they were made. I was present while they were forming. And presence, I had learned, is harder to dismiss than protest. The family adjusted slowly. Some resisted, some adapted. A few distanced themselves entirely, uncomfortable with the new balance. That hurt more than I expected, but it also clarified something important. Anyone who needed me to stay silent to feel comfortable wasn't invested in me as a person. One evening, months after my return, we gathered again, this time without the tension that once filled every pause. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't warm in the way movies portray family moments, but it was real. A relative asked about my plans, not vaguely, specifically. Another asked for my opinion on something that affected everyone. My parents listened without interrupting. No one rushed to smooth over disagreements. That was the moment I knew the truth had settled in, not dramatically, permanently. Later that night, my father found me sitting alone on the porch. He stood beside me for a long time before speaking. He didn't try to justify anything. He didn't explain. He simply said he was sorry for not trusting me enough to handle the truth when it mattered. That apology didn't fix everything, but it acknowledged something that could never be ignored again. I told him that being sent away had taught me how strong I could be without approval, how observant I could be when excluded, and how dangerous it is to underestimate someone just because they ask questions. He nodded. From then on, the label difficult disappeared, not replaced with praise or admiration, but with something far more meaningful: respect. Not everyone gave it freely, but no one denied it openly. I carried that lesson with me beyond my family, at school, in conversations, in decisions about my future. I learned to trust my instincts, to listen closely, to speak carefully but firmly. I learned that silence can be powerful when chosen and destructive when imposed. The revenge I never planned came quietly. It came in the form of independence, of being seen clearly, of no longer needing to be managed, corrected, or removed. They had tried to solve a problem by sending it away. Instead, they created someone who could no longer be ignored. When people ask now what changed everything, I don't point to a fight or a revelation. I don't describe a dramatic moment. I tell them something simpler. I stopped accepting stories that didn't include me. And once I did that, the truth had no choice but to follow. Being sent away didn't break me. It stripped away the noise. It taught me patience. It taught me restraint. And when I returned, I didn't come back angry. I came back aware. That awareness was enough. Because once people realize you see them clearly, they either change or they step aside. Either way, you move forward. And I did. Not as the difficult one, but as the one who finally stayed.